Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Blabbit. Blabbit's where we bring esteemed experts in to share their experiences, their opinions, their knowledge of different fields. As you'll see, it's Paul and myself right now because for some reason our esteemed guest is running somewhat late.
A little bit connectivity issues, Glenn. I do
Yes.
believe we're struggling to try to make that connection happen, but in the meanwhile, carry on, sir.
As they say, the show must go on.
Amen. Amen. So you want to introduce ourselves?
Sure. For anyone that's new or hasn't seen this before, my name is Glenn Ingram. I've been spending the better part of the last 2 decades working on honing in skills for communication, for persuasion, and for influence to help people become better salespersons. Paul, how about you?
Well, thank you, Glenn. My name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking coach and presentation expert, and I work with organizations to make sure that their messaging is, number one, very clear, and number two, that all of the people who are entrusted to deliver that message are doing it to the top of their ability. So I make sure they look good too, as well as the
Nice.
company. Yeah.
There you go. Well, one of the things that we were going to talk about with James was about processes. And why don't we just kind of explore that a little bit? Because I know from a sales experience, if you don't have a process, it's the old adage, if you're failing to plan, you're planning to fail. So you
Mhm.
kind of have to have a roadmap that you're taking someone down and have processes in place so that you follow up with people. Because not everyone makes a decision immediately. And I found your odds of them making a decision down the road increase by contacting them again and by asking. So,
Mhm.
what type of processes with speech? Oh, hold on. It looks like James may be sneaking in late. He's trying to get connected. So, let's talk a little bit about some processes with speech and speech coaching, if you would, real quick, while James is trying to connect.
Okay, sounds good. Well, in terms of, yes, having a process is very important in terms of preparation, definitely in terms of course correction when you're in that moment, because very often, because when you are speaking and when the stakes are high, you're in a public speaking environment, there's a lot of opportunity there for things to sabotage you because of lack of consistency. So it remains a mystery. And isn't that really the way that you get consistent results, is by having a process for doing these things? Otherwise, you're just getting lucky. And I know most of the people I speak with, they say that sometimes I hit it out of the park, but more often than not, I'm frustrated and dissatisfied with the way that I have delivered whatever message it was. And it could be a meeting, it could be in a networking event, it could be a presentation, it could be a sales call, it could be any of those things. But if you have a process, a template that you can utilize, and certainly have a process for preparation and then course correction, you're going to be more consistent.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you always say, planning to be spontaneous. Because when you have a process, you can always skip across and go from A to B to D back to C. But if you don't
Mhm.
have this process and you don't kind of think of some of these things that you need to do as you go on and have a conversation, odds are when you miss a step A or a step D and you're glossing over things, you're missing some important details, maybe some important structures, if you will, to help someone get to the point where you're trying to get to.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. So
I'm gonna,
is James at the door, knocking on the door right now, Glenn?
I see his name. I'm just trying to see him. You know, we were talking earlier. It's a little bit foggy on both coasts, so the computer may be a little bit foggy right now as well.
Ah,
I see
okay.
his name there, but it says device not connected. So perhaps again he's having some technical issues.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going, and so we'll keep the conversation in this, certainly within this realm. And I know we were discussing, in anticipation of this episode, just some of the the similar processes that we go through whether we want to or not.
Hmm.
And there are some that are set up by nature, by our nature, that we don't have control over, yet we have to go through that entire process. And one of those things is, oh, I see that James is chatting with us, so he's
It says
here.
cannot
And
connect his mic and camera.
okay, I believe, I'm not sure if he's actually listening to us. Will you chat with him, Glenn,
Yes,
to get him involved? Okay. So I'm just going to keep on, uh, I'm just going to keep on talking.
perfect.
Just trying to be very clear about my message. So one of those things that James teaches as a master life coach is being able to overcome those scenarios, those situations in life, not overcome them, but be able to habituate with them, since it is a process you cannot eliminate. And it has a lot of these scenarios have a real relevance to uh, what we do in public speaking. I tell people you are going to run into certain forces that are going to be at work. You have to figure out ways to get through it. And I know you were bringing up the topic of grief and of loss, and when unexpected things happen, uh, and that sense of loss, whatever it might be, it takes on many forms. But you had some interesting thoughts about that, Glenn. What were
Yeah,
you?
it's kind of interesting. In my day job, I work with a lot of people that are involved in litigation, and they and I've just noticed here over the last few months how they go through grief kind of like loss. At first it's denial, then it's anger, then it's acceptance, and they kind of move down that same path, if you will. So it's just kind of interesting that there are many. As we spoke with Victoria Grinman a month or so ago, if you recall, there are many forms of lesser forms of PTSD as opposed to stuff that we think about with a major loss, an accident, military, first responders. I think there's
Right.
also lesser versions of grief as well that we kind of all go through on a little basis. So it may be small, it may be large, but nonetheless, they are things that our psyche and our subconscious is dealing with on a regular basis that I think if we don't identify them, it's going to cause some disruption, some obstacles, and some things that they need to understand so they can help overcome and deal with them.
Now, in part of that dealing with it, is it a matter of just rolling up your sleeves? And I want to relate this to business owners and really to everyone who's in business, because they are really the captain of their own ship. Even if you work for a large corporation, still your career is your business. You are the one who's in charge of it. So is there is that part of it too? In other words, do you have to recognize and take a step back as opposed to hard charging toward a solution?
I think that depends on the individual because I mean, we all handle things differently, we all process things differently. So I guess the older I get, I become more intelligent to realize I just don't know most answers. So,
Mhm.
you know, it depends on your personality and what's going to work for you. I think with any of these things, we have to kind of identify, maybe try some different types of tactics or techniques and see what works best for each individual. What do you think?
Well, is it really a matter of recognizing what's really going on rather than maybe what our initial knee-jerk reaction is to one or another scenarios?
I think that's in everything that we deal with in every day. A lot of times if I'm talking to Paul and Paul is kind of frustrated about X, it really may not be that X is the problem. It's just X is what's top of mind, but it might be C that's really derailed things or brought to a stance where you're upset, you're frustrated about something, and X is just what's on top of mind. That's what's being vocalized or verbalized right now. So yeah, I think anytime you're talking with people, it's finding out the root. Prime example, I'm involved in a business deal right now, interaction with multiple people involved. And it's kind of hard to know how to completely respond when you only have this much of the information because for different reasons, they're keeping some issues or some parts of it close to the vest. So if you don't know everything, You have to do your best to try and respond and react to what you do know, understand that there's a lot that you don't know.
Absolutely. And while we're on that subject, I saw a really interesting billboard just on one of the highways, one of the local highways here where I live. And it was just a really interesting quote. And it relates to what you just said, Glenn. And that is, the way I treat you is the way I feel about me. And that's true. It is a matter of, you cannot, again, when you talk about limited information, you don't know what another person is necessarily going through. So, it is a matter of, take things with a grain of salt and understand that, if you have limited information, you literally have limited information about many of the people that you're interacting with, and you
Mhm.
don't know if their responses or their requests to you or their actions, their reactions, are based on something that literally has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, I remember I went through a negotiating seminar, like 3-day conference, if you will, back years ago, and it was run by a gentleman named Dr. Karras that was very effective in aerospace negotiating back in the 70s. And the one thing that they taught you is you never know how much power you have in a negotiation if you know it won't be till the end. So I remember one of the test that, if you will, they had us do was I had to purchase a big piece of equipment, like a bulldozer or something like that, in order to start a job. If I didn't buy it by tomorrow, I would lose a big project, maybe $1 million contract. Now, in turn, you have a bulldozer, and if you don't sell it today, you're going to go into bank and you're going to lose your house. So we have two outside influences that are going to motivate us to negotiate in different directions, but we don't know that who comes out further ahead from one another. So it was an interesting kind of test, if you will, an experiment to learn how to kind of read people, try and find out what's going on with them, so that you can have a conversation and have a negotiation and do your best and put your best foot forward.
Hmm. Let me take just a time out for 1 second and ask you a quick connectivity question so I can
Yeah,
chat with James just really quickly. Would there be wisdom in him shutting off, disengaging the camera and his microphone with other apps on his laptop or whatever device he's using? In other words, is it possible that they're overriding his connectivity to our live stream?
I'm not going to say anything's not possible. I've never ran that before or ran into problems with that. The only time I would have was a microphone. Sometimes when you're connecting to a new piece of software, you have to make sure that the proper microphone is connected, the proper camera is connected if you have multiple ones. So
Okay.
um, So yeah, it may be unplugging and plugging in a webcam if you're using that. Unplugging and plugging in a microphone. For some reason, this Yeti and Skype have been fighting me for the last month. Every time I jump on a Skype call, I have to unplug it, plug it back into my computer. So it's
Mhm.
just the old reboot, if you will. You have to find different ways to reboot each device.
Turn it off, turn it off, turn it back on again, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like the logic that goes into taking a nap.
Yes.
Turn it off and then turn it back on again, and it actually works a little bit better.
Hmm.
All right, so James, it's interesting. James says that he can hear us right now, that he is actually privy to live stream. So I think maybe it's a matter of just checking preferences or giving allowing um, the camera and the microphone on that laptop to engage with live stream. I don't know if that is a preference or if that is a security and privacy issue that has to be connected. What do you think, Glenn?
Yeah, I would always start using the rule of elimination. So if that there's a toolbar down at the bottom, go to settings. When you go to settings, you can see camera. Make sure it's on the
Hmm.
right camera, because again, you may have an internal camera versus an external camera. Maybe your laptop
Right,
is blocked with one of those things, so people can't see into your laptop. So is
right,
that covered up? Going into audio and making sure that the microphone and the speakers, so your input and output are on
right.
whatever you're typing, whatever you're using. Um,
Hmm.
it's always good when you're on a newer platform, piece of software just to go in and kind of play around with a little bit, and so you know what needs to be done to be set up.
Okay. All right. So, just in terms of staying on topic, because
Hmm.
I'm being very optimistic that James will at some point be able to connect with us, but he is looking to talk about his book about self care and self love and treating yourself with that kindness. You know, we talk so much about empathy. We talk about in leadership because we do have so many people who are involved with leadership because it has always been a very important topic, but recently it has been very much a topic in flux. And when we talk about making sure that you empathize with other people, you are considerate with other people, that's always a topic of discussion. But then, of course, there's the whole feeling that you also have to make sure you take care of yourself too. And you make sure that you show yourself the same sort of compassion. And, it's interesting. It's not a matter of personality or somebody being friendly or not friendly or cranky or moody or any of those things, because often that will hide the way that we actually treat ourselves. And I'm not just speculating because I actually know this to be true. Something that I've been wrestling with, I used to wrestle with because I was totally unaware earlier in decades ago, and still something that I have to consider and make sure that I am on top of now, which is you treat everyone else with the kind of kindness that you often don't give yourself. you know and that's just something that I have noticed over the last couple of years that I'm learning how to do that.
Well, and I think more often than not, we are our own worst critics. We beat ourselves up over decisions, mistakes, if you will. I was on a podcast with Josh Becraft yesterday, and we were talking. He always tries to wrap it up with gratitude. And I had just talked about how I was frustrated myself with a process as we're talking about it because I had system A in place. I acquired system B to turn system A into revenue, and it is set there, and I hadn't done anything with it. And I just hired someone this week to run system B to monetize system A. And as he was talking about gratitude, it just kind of struck me. It's like, yeah, I was frustrated myself that I didn't do this quicker, but I'm happy of myself that now I have that answer and I won't make that mistake again. So I think it's one thing to maybe criticize yourself a little bit for doing something wrong, but then appreciate that you've identified this. And now it's a positive thing you can have going forward and give yourself forgiveness, if you will.
Well, now that's an interesting thing. What you make me think of, Glenn, is how many of the, I guess, failed attempts that I've made in business.
Hmm.
And recently I've gone through an experience where I go back and revisit those things that it took me a while because I'm usually not somebody who gives up easily on something. I stay in there almost to my detriment. But when you go through the process of eventually letting go and realizing, all right, I've got to move on to the next thing, and thank both yourself and the situation for having taught you whatever it did teach you.
Hmm.
But I've been revisiting some of those things, and being a creative person, they are literally creations of things, not just situations or memories, but going back and really reassessing the value of those. And in the same way you were talking about introducing system B to be able to support system A, in the same way I see the connectivity between all of those things. Do do you do that often? Do you I just happen to be in that mindset right now where I'm returning to some of those old projects from years ago and pulling them in and making them part of my narrative right now.
I think with this, and again, we were talking about this yesterday, is kind of following Brad Fetterman's point of view. And I think Brad's point of view, the more I thought about how he said, business is going to change as much in the next year or two as it's changed in the last 10 or 20. I
Right.
think that could probably be said for the last 200 years. Our system, our world, our lives have evolved so quickly over the last 200 when you look at the previous millions of years that the earth was here as a planet. So I think as things evolve quickly, I think we constantly have to take a look at things on a shorter window. So instead of looking at things once a year, once a quarter, it almost seems like you have to kind of take a little bit of time, maybe each week, definitely each month, and evaluate, what do I know? What do I need? What can I bring into this? And constantly be evaluating those processes to say, okay, I'm not going to give this thing 6 months to a year, maybe. If I'm not seeing any signs in a week, a month, 2 months, it may be time to either tweak it or move on and try something else, because things are moving very quickly. If you don't look around, you might miss something.
What is that from? That's a
It was
good.
from some movie.
It is. It is. It moves pretty. Oh, it's from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
There you go.
Yeah,
A great
that's right.
movie.
A great coming of age movie and a great comedy. Yes,
Hmm.
indeed. Well, you know, we should actually probably put together Blabbit's greatest quotes, because
There you go.
there have been some really interesting ones. Many of them borrowed, but many of them created
Hmm.
just on the fly. And
Hmm.
yeah, just have just a montage of all of these interesting quotes, and maybe juxtapose the ones that seem to be in conflict with each other, so we can replicate the yin and yang of life,
Hmm.
which is strengths become weaknesses and weaknesses ultimately become strengths, and it can
Amen.
go either way. Are we having any luck with James?
He's still trying. You know, no
Uh,
luck, James says. He said the device, for whatever reason, still is not connecting. Um, I don't know, James, if you've ever been on a StreamYard before. Maybe if you, sometimes you have to reset the software if the software has had an update or something like that. He is connecting a camera and an external mic, so he has no give up in him. That's great.
that's good. That's good. And you know what? If for whatever reason this doesn't work out today, Glenn, we'll get in touch with James and get him on a future episode, I'm sure.
If nothing else, he's helping us with our improv skills.
That's true. That's true. Just kind of keeping the ball up in the air. Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. So I know people came looking for master life coach advice. So let me ask you a really offbeat question. Aside from your two girls, do you
Hmm.
have you ever considered yourself to possibly be a master life coach?
Um, it's kind of interesting because I think it's perspective. From my perspective, with whatever coaching I've done with people, whatever advice, whatever consulting, I think most of us just do things every day and don't think it's an aha type of moment. And I think anytime you start talking to more and more people and you share experiences, you share, opinions, positions, stuff like that, we all have something that we can give to one another if we're willing to do so. Um, as I mentioned before, I met a couple of our Blabbits ago. I mentioned something about creating videos and stuff like this, and I had someone come up to me a week later and like, "Thank you for kicking me in the pants. I'm going to make videos now." And it's just something that I do every day. So I think all of us have experiences that can help other people. It's just finding the people that need help with what you have efficiencies at, experience in, and ways of that you've been able to overcome and correct things. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and it's really interesting that one of the motivations actually for putting Blabbit together is personally is for me is just the opportunity to learn every week by interacting with people who have very clear perspectives, have made some very clear choices in their life, and then are more than willing to share what that experience feels like, either giving others advice or having gone through a situation themselves. And I find that every single week I have those aha moments. I literally I'm writing down notes. I'm writing down things that stick with me. I'm rewatching some of the episodes just to broaden my horizons. And it never fails. It never fails that somebody says something um, that just triggers either a different perspective based on an old scenario, or something that I need to embrace, something that I need to integrate on a more consistent basis to achieve more freedom and more satisfaction in the work that I do.
And I think, there are many different versions, if you will. I mean, there are some paid things. There are some things where it's just kind of like it's a group, a support group, if you will. Kind of like, after everything started to break down 2 years ago and you were talking to other coaches and kind of having meetings with them. That's kind of what this thing is that I was on with Craft now for the fifth week yesterday. It's literally people that were all kind of in the same work day job type of thing, and
Mhm.
just talking about experiences you've had, things like this. And it may be that Josh says something, or Joshua, or Bill, or Rick, or Kim, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, and I make a note because that's something else that I can maybe understand, appreciate, add to my arsenal, if you will. And just doing that back and forth, I think, is always good, because not only do we learn from people of us, but we can always learn from people equal to us. Sometimes you can learn with people that maybe aren't quite up to your speed yet. I mean, I think that's one thing I've learned over the years, especially in a sales environment, is I've learned some of the best things from people that probably weren't as successful in the sales realm as I've learned from people that were very successful. Because I think sometimes if you're learning, if you're new, if you're struggling with something, you probably put a little bit more effort and a work in than someone that's extremely successful or that comes through naturally. So I think just having ways to talk to one person, 5 people, 10 people, you're going to learn stuff, and we're going to be kind of coaches to each other back and forth.
Well, it's interesting. I went through, made me think of an experience I had just a few days ago, which is I was speaking to uh, a business owner, and we were just talking about some of the things that some of the topics that I touch on most often when I'm working with organizations or I'm working with cohorts of executives together. And I said, one of the things that I always talk about is listening behaviors. In other words, the way that your audience hears what it is that you're saying. And then I'm explaining how you have to use a certain framework because we all have a certain listening bias, and that just explaining the details of all of that. And then he replied by saying, well, yes, in order to be a good executive, you really have to be able to listen. In other words, he put the listening behaviors on the executives rather than what I was talking about, which is the listening behaviors of your audience. And I realized in that moment that the guy who tries to make sure that people are really clear wasn't being really clear. And I've been saying those words in that way. And whether that was a random, just something that only popped up once because of one person's certain perspective, or whether I've been actually missing the mark, was a real learning experience for me to make sure that I was being much more clear, because he was really talking about active listening, making sure that you are an active listener, and I was talking about leveraging the way that people listen to you and
Mhm.
use that. So those are two very different topics. And
Yes.
being able to parse between all of that is, it's my job. And I'm taking that back to the workshop, and I'm going to fix the language.
That reminds me, about 12 or 15 years ago, I was working for a large company in a sales organization. And there were some, you go out for lunch with different people doing the same job you have, and people complain about, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, and stuff like that. And so I thought, you know what? Maybe just the people, the managers that are teaching this, coaching this, aren't saying it in a way that can relate to them. Maybe I can do a better job. So I went in and volunteered and said, why don't you let me help do some of this training or whatever? It seems like some of the stuff isn't, there's a connection being missed or something like that. And so they said, sure. It's one of those things, you think you can do it better, go ahead and do it, Glenn. So I started doing some of the training, going over some of the things to help people with what was going on, A, B, C, whatever. And it was kind of interesting. Within a month or two, all of a sudden we're at lunch, and we're having a conversation about whatever was going on. And one person said, "Well, I wish someone would have told me that." And I looked at him, I said, "I told you that last Wednesday in the training. Why are you not listening to me? I'm volunteering to help you to do this stuff. If I'm going to volunteer and take my time, would you at least pay attention?" Like, oh, so it's kind of interesting. We always, I think our mind is easily distracted. We go in different ways. And especially if it's going on for longer than our attention can normally stay in contact with somebody, yeah, our mind starts to wander. And then I wasn't even paying attention when Paul was talking. I was just smiling and nodding at him.
And it's true. I mean, that's a huge obstacle to have to overcome, which is to make sure that you keep people's attention and hope that they retain some sort of a takeaway from the things that you're saying. And it will vary, and it probably should vary for people, but that's the challenge in being really, really clear is you want the messaging to pique their curiosity, certainly, so they stay interested. You want the framework that you're delivering to be strong and solid so that they have an understanding of where this is going. And you do want them to sort of help co-create the moment because they're following along. You know, it's interesting. We take on all the responsibility of being the messenger when it's actually a dance between you and the people that you're speaking with, because they have to process what it is you're saying in order for the results to be positive, in order for you to be successful.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing that I've learned from this over the last year and spending more time with you is when you're up there in front of a group and you're doing a presentation, either reduce the heck out of or shut that stupid PowerPoint off, because when they engage their eyes, they disengage their ears. They're not listening to what you're saying when they're reading. And finding ways to make it more interactive instead of just someone up there teaching, talking to a group or whatever, because the more they're interacting, the more they're going to pay attention and the more they're going to be involved and the more they're going to take out of what you're up there sharing with people.
Exactly. And the number one way to do that is to ask questions.
Mhm.
Ask them questions. It doesn't mean you don't know. They can be rhetorical questions, or they can be questions that you don't know the answer to. And you want to get a consensus, or you want to get even just a few people to contribute or to participate in what it is you're doing. Because that interaction, I always say that group interactions, as soon as you engage with somebody else, there's an immediate connection. It's not a distraction from what it is that you're doing. It enhances that experience, because as much as we may be a group of people sitting listening to you, Glenn, as the speaker, and we all know each other, as soon as one of us interacts with you, that is a certain level of what we call introducing third-party validation, because you're making that connection with somebody else. And everybody, that we, as much as we like to be spoken to, spoken with, but we also like to be a little bit of a fly on the wall and watch what's going on. So it is a higher level of engagement. It sort of goes along with the idea that eye contact should not be 100% of the time, which logically seems like it's wrong, because in order to keep somebody's interest, you should be locked right in on them. And that's not the case. It's not always the case. I saw
Paul, could you give me a drum roll?
Yes. Ah, there he is. Hey, James.
Hey guys, good morning.
It's great to see you.
It's
You've got
great to
some
be
catching
seen.
up. You've got some catching up to do, my friend.
I do. I really do. I guess it's good afternoon by now, huh? Yeah, well, let's do what we can. I mean, I'm you guys'
Okay.
lead me, whatever you want to do. Let's make the best use of the time.
All right, good. So listen, I saw in the chat you were saying, "Oh man, I'm not connected. I want to get in on this juicy conversation." What
Absolutely.
conversation was that? I never pay attention to anything
I think
that Glenn
we
and
were
I
talking
say.
about like overcoming obstacles and
Yeah, there
what
you
you
go.
do to remain resilient.
Right.
And I'm listening and I'm like, oh my God, that's me. Let me jump in.
Go.
But I
Go,
think
man.
it's really, really important that, I mean, that's an aspect of self-love, is having resiliency. Because let me use what just happened as an example. We have a tendency as human beings to find the fault. And in my research, one of the things that's a huge combatant of self-love is entertaining the voice, the condemning voice. It would have been very easy for me to go, I've never been good with connecting things. I've always been horrible at technological things. I'm just going to give up. But instead, self-love kicked in. I began to laugh. Like, if you guys could actually see me, you'd probably be like, this guy needs to be on medication, because I had to laugh. I had to do a deep laugh to get past any condemning thoughts that any of this was my fault or as a result of a shortcoming. And so I just let it all go, and I kept going, because my next connection could have been the connection to get me in. Guys, this has got to be a story I got to tell you offline. I've switched devices. I'm now using my Apple iPad. This is my third set of devices that I connect. It's been crazy. But the idea is resilience. Keep going. Take the next step. Don't let that condemning voice take you out of the running. Press through. And that's part of self-love. This whole process couldn't have been a better intro for my book.
There you go. There you go. And Glenn, I know you have talked about this all the time James brought up such a good point. Keep going, keep trying. You never know when you're just a foot away from breaking through, or whatever you want to say, a megabyte away from getting through and getting in, and then having this kind of an experience. It actually, it even makes it more joyous.
It does. It really does, because you look back in the rearview mirror and you go, wow, that was some really nasty road I came over, but I did it. And it fuels, in the research I've done, guys, as a good lead into that, one of the things it says is you start to count up the small wins. So everything you do, if you win, you kind of make a little check mark, and then you win again. And that fuels this mindset and this hunger that you develop to want to keep going. And you get more resilient, you get stronger, and you become more confident. And so 16 miles down the road, you say to yourself, well, at this point, it can't get any uglier. And if it does, I'm confident that I'll be able to overcome whatever the new challenges might be. And so from there, you do what I was able to do, which is learn how to walk again after a stroke, learn how to talk again after a stroke. You keep going, because the next step, the next stage could, in fact, be your breakthrough. And so when you finally get upright again after having been bedridden after 6 or 7 months, you say to yourself, well, can't much happen now that I don't think I can overcome. And you get this, the S starts to appear in your chest, and you really feel good and confident about who you are to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one thing that I've made comments to people quite frequently is, if you're happy that I'm here talking with James and Paul right now, I can't be mad about what happened last week, last month, or last year that may not have been positive. Because if you've ever seen this movie called Mr. Destiny, Michael Caine's talking to Jim Belushi, and they're talking about different spots in his life. And it's all around when he struck out in high school. They lost the baseball game, but this happened, this happened, this happened. All of a sudden, Mr. Destiny came back and he hit the ball. And then this happened, and this happened. And now all of a sudden he's regretting that he doesn't have his wife, because when he hit the ball, he dated somebody else instead of her, and our lives change. So you have to appreciate the misses as much as the hits, because if you're happy with where you are right now, you wouldn't have been here if one of those things would have changed.
That's a good point. Very good point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all. You can really tie all of these things into self-love. One of the really big points, Glenn, if I can piggyback on your statement, to bring it into self-love's focus, and it's one of the 7 dimensions that I indicate in my book, is the fact that we have to learn how resilience also means a big part of that is forgiving yourself, and not just not condemning yourself in the moment, but really, like you said, Glenn, letting it go, coming to grips with who you are in the context of what life has presented to you, and moving from there. It's valuing yourself. If I can, to be completely and totally geeky, self-love means having a high regard for yourself and your well-being and your happiness. I'll say it again. Self-love is having a high regard for yourself, your overall well-being, and your happiness. So anything that jeopardizes any of those components, your high regard for yourself and or your happiness, we have to combat. And that's where self-love comes from, is a force that helps you plow through either of those two components. So you get to a point where you say to yourself, I feel pretty good about it. It's not an arrogance. It's not a self-absorption. It's not, being tyrannical or maniacal. It's just having a high regard for self, period. That
Mhm.
you say, I can do this. And that takes some mental gymnastics sometimes. It takes a gumption. It takes having something inside that will help you to overcome those things.
I'm glad that you addressed that, because I was just thinking, what about the people who argue that isn't self-love just ambition and overdrive, or ego, or, as you said, arrogance? And it's not. But it is an understanding of yourself, and that need for resilience, and that need to count on yourself to show up and follow through.
Absolutely.
So let me add in something else in terms of having this mindset. What about the people who support you? In other words, the people that are around you. Does that uh, is there a recounting, or a reshuffling of those people that sometimes has to occur, or is it just
Absolutely.
simply relational that has to be adjusted?
Well, there has to be a shuffling because it's a two-sided coin. The first part of that, Paul, is this, and that's a great point that you mentioned. The first part is this. You guys, if we were college friends, right? Um, and you came over to see me, you would want me at all times, because of our relationship, because you care for me, you would want me to present to you at all times my best version. Now, because you love me, because we go way back, because there's history, you'll take whatever version of James I present. But I guarantee you would prefer the James that got a lot of sleep, the James that if you came to my house, I would open the door and say, hey, Glenn, Paul, come on in, guys, have a seat. Let me get you something to eat and drink. I'll be right back. You would prefer the hospitable James, but you would love the broken, sleepy-eyed, hungover guy that cracks the door. It's like, oh, guys, hey, how you doing? Come on in. I got to sweep tons of stuff off of the couch before you can sit down. I never offer you anything. You'll take that version because you love me. So to answer your point, or to better address your point, the reshuffling occurs when we realize we may have friends and family that aren't as likely to let us be who we are, including the faults and the failures. And if they continue to bring up, well, you did this, you did that, sometimes we may find that those people just simply don't gel with who we are at the moment. And we may need to create some space and some distance for their well-being's sake, not for ours, because it really amounts to harmony in relationships and interpersonal harmony. That's where the self-love comes in. So when we realize we're connected to people that aren't supporting who we are in the moment, we have to make some decisions. And sometimes that means the tribe or the herd has to be thinned just momentarily.
Well, let's expand on that, if you will, because I think a lot of times it's not their judgment, it's not their bad opinions about us, it's our judgment and our bad opinions about ourselves.
Sure.
So we always preach forgiveness, forgiving Paul for what he did, forgiving James for what he did, but we never preach forgiving ourselves for what we've done and letting us move back. I say this because I went through kind of a little bit of a path, if you will, with that last year. And there was a few things in my life that I always thought, why was I at the wrong place at the wrong time for that? And so I went and got some ink of an hourglass and a compass
Awesome.
colliding to forgive myself and understand that we're rarely at the right place at the right time, just like we're rarely at the wrong place at the wrong time. 90%, 99% of the time, we're somewhere in between. So give yourself forgiveness for the bad times as much as you celebrate the great times.
Absolute. Great point. Excellent point. There's two aspects of that I want to bring up just quickly and briefly. Number one is forgiving yourself. And I explain a process in one of my 7 dimensions of self-love in the book. And it's something that I've used as a life coach. It's an actual exercise that I have people go through so that they can release themselves from any what I call pitfalls, potholes, and speed bumps. Sometimes, as you mentioned so beautifully, Glenn, it's not them, it's how we process things, the relationships, it's how we value or fail to value some of our connections. And sometimes that's just as needful to let go as something we may have done that may have been a sin or an outright fault. It's healthy on both ends. But the point is this: self love is such a dynamic way to live, because what you do is you start to create reservoirs within. And you do this, guys. This is what I tell my life coaching clients. When you start to create these reserves and reservoirs, it's from the excess of those reservoirs and reserves that you give to other people, because we often make the mistake of trying to give people from accounts. We try to make withdrawals from accounts that we know are already overdrawn. So there's got to be something there. Self-love allows us to make the deposits. So when the time and circumstance requires, whether I need to be more patient, more committed, more whatever, I can dig in and pull from the reserves that I've created every day for myself. Because self-love is what you do first for you, then for other people in that specific order. Self-love is me being the best version of me for me. And then if it works that it's the best version of me that benefits you, Paul, and you, Glenn, then that works as well. But the process really is me being the best version I can be. And when I'm that best person, I will help to enhance and facilitate better relationships with each one of you guys and anybody in our lives. So it works on both ways. But I like what you said, Glenn. The bottom line is we have to own it and take responsibility. Whatever you've said or done to me, it may have been an outright bad thing, but how I process it and how I relate to you going forward, and then what I do about that process when I walk away is what's going to create my health or my unhealthy mindset. And we've got to consider those things.
Let me ask you a quick question, James, about language.
Sure.
And if you have a change of mindset, if you do decide to adopt this and become a practitioner of self-love, how much of that thought process do you need to share with language? And if so, what are some of the first steps? What are some of the first things you tell yourself? But also, what do you share with others? Sometimes and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the experience sometimes is to, as you said, get ownership of this mindset before you start to share it, because it can be sabotaged.
Mm-hmm.
It can be weakened if you are influenced by other people. So what kind of language do you find that the people you work with use, that you yourself use? And what are some of those first steps that we can advise to our audience?
Excellent question. And here's what I hope is a really apt response. So one of the 7 dimensions of self-love, Paul, that I discuss in the book is what I call the power of affirmations and declarations. And that's the words, that's your last, what you say. And you really have to get into a rhythm of saying things to yourself, to you, that are going to be fruitful for your growth and development. For example, after my near-death experience when I had the stroke, after years of not taking care of myself, I lost all functionality and sensation on my left side. So here I am now, 48 years of age, almost 6'4", 250, a decent-sized guy. I'm bedridden. So everything about manhood that we would all applaud and high-five, I'm decimated. I'm in a bed. I can't move because I failed to do what was necessary for my health. So what do I do to answer your question and to put that into focus with a page right from my rehab journey is I had to begin to speak to myself as if I were a good friend talking to me. So one of those things was the label disabled. I am classified as being disabled. I never subscribed to that, ever. It's not that I was living in a different reality. It's not that I wasn't coming to grips with what was, but I just failed to let that label be my label. I know what a disabled person is, but my thing was, I'm not going to be that because I don't want to be. So when people would come into my room, they would say, James, so you're paralyzed. Wow, you're really young to be so badly, in poor health. So I would learn to say, no, I'm not paralyzed. I just can't move my left side right now, but I will. So it winds up being a war of words. So here's what I would say. You have to first understand that your voice, the good voice, the encouraging voice, needs to be the loudest voice in your head, and then make that the loudest voice in the room. It has to be the loudest voice in your head. And then, so I'm not disabled. I just can't move right now. See, that's a whole different mindset. What I'm saying is, this is momentary. This is temporary. What you may say is, oh man, you're never going to move ever again. I'm not subscribing to that. So I'm not going to argue with you, but in my mind and in my being, I would prefer to look at this as momentary, it's temporary. So what I have to say to people is, no, I'm not paralyzed, or I am paralyzed, but I will walk again. I will talk again. I will get back to normalcy. So you develop a diet, if you will, of telling yourself the things that are important for you to hear. Last thing I'll say to that. So there's an experience I recount in my book where I get out of the bathroom one day doing my morning routine. I come into the hallway and I come face to face, guys, with a presence in my hallway. And the presence said to me, James, for the past 6 months, everybody's weighed in on who you are and what they think you're going to do. The doctors have said, the therapists have said, but the presence asked me, son, what do you say about what's going to happen to you? And I stood there looking at this space in the hallway, scratching my head, but I knew exactly what was being communicated. Everybody has said about James. Now, what does James say to James about James? And that's the difference. So Glenn, what is Glenn saying to Glenn about what Glenn needs to do? Glenn, Paul, what is Paul saying to Paul? What are you saying to yourselves? What do we say to ourselves? Amidst all the other voices, our voice is the voice that matters. Make sense? And that's where we have to live and breathe. We don't become combative. We don't become arrogant. We don't become unfriendly to people. But your voice is the voice that really is going to dictate success, failure, or this sense of drive and determination. Your voice is the key to the ignition that's going to turn this motor vehicle on and get you down the road. So I hope that's a fitting response to what you mentioned.
Excellent.
Well, it is. And I think it brings perspective, because a lot of times I wish I would have, I wish I can, I wish I could. But when you see people that are having a catastrophic experience, I work in the accessibility realm, so I deal with people that have disabilities all the time, and they don't see themselves as disabled, even though they do have huge obstacles in their life. And quite often, I see people that aren't disabled feeling sorry themselves for things that they can overcome. They just are letting that 6 inches between their ears get in their way and not overcoming that obstacle. So let's talk about that a little bit more. When you really have a true obstacle and you refuse to let it define you, as opposed to feeling sorry for yourself and letting yourself get in your own way of accomplishing A, B, or C.
So, very good point. So here's one of the things I would say. Let's take it out of the realm of self-love. Let's put it around the golf course in the medical and the rehab world, if we could. So I'm going to put it up the green just a little bit. And here's what I would say. So a lot of times what happens, like for stroke patients, they teach you what's called compensatory strategies. For me, I was always right-handed. My right side is extremely strong. I was a pretty strong guy. Wasn't a weightlifter, but pretty strong. So when the left goes down, they teach you how to leverage movement and balance with your dominant side. That is what's called a compensatory strategy. Guys, I can't think of a better compensatory strategy than self-love. When everything else may be off kilter and out of balance, self-love is what's going to bring you back. Self-love is going to be you using your strength, your strong side, if you will, to get you back on your feet and in motion again. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Self-love is that thing, because it's a very real concept. It's 4 years after the fact, and I'm still rehabbing. I still consider myself a rehab person. And matter of fact, I just signed up for another round of physical and occupational rehab the other day. I'm going to start it off because there's more motion, more dexterity that I can have in my fingers that I don't have. So I'm continuing to press forward, just like I didn't give up getting into this podcast. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep pressing. So there is a very real issue on my left side. I can move now better than I could before, but it's still relatively weak. That's a real issue. I can't deny that. If I tell you that doesn't exist, I'm a fool. So that's very real. Back to your point, Glenn, that's real. So what do? You work with what you have, and you get the support you need to get my situation better, improving. And that's just the way life is. And I think self-love is the best leverage you have to be able to do that. Or at least that's what I'm sharing with what I've put in my book.
Okay. Well, I have a quick question for you, James, and I know that you have a lot of appearances that you're doing lately with your book and whatnot. Can you give us an extra 10 minutes on the end of this Blabbit?
Be happy to. Thank you both. Sure.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
Now let's see, but the hard question, that was an easy one, Paul. Come on.
I wanted to get that in there before all of a sudden, people were wondering, why are they going past 1 o'clock? Because usually we do a hard stop after an hour, but with everything that went on here today, we're thoroughly enjoying the perspective that you are bringing, and I think these are very important things that everybody needs to hear
Yeah, I appreciate the
for
time.
themselves.
I got to tell you, I have just since I've published the book, and I would show you my folder if you could really see it. I have a folder about 2 inches thick of self-love related research that I've just discovered. I'm talking in the past week. So this process of learning about self-love, of learning how it can be leveraged to help my clients and help myself, is still an ongoing process as well. I say that to say I believe self-love has such a richness in terms of what it can do for all of us, which is what compelled me to write the book. So I'm immensely appreciative to both of you for having me on. I think this process, I think this tool called self-love is a huge leverage for all of us in whatever our backgrounds have been and whatever life has presented to us recently. Self-love can be the answer for all of it, for us to get to where we want and need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned those compensatory exercises. And I think that's something that we all deal with in our daily lives. So I'd like to ask both of you, when people are finding ways to compensate for weaknesses. So whether it be a fear of being in front of people talking, whether it be a fear of what you've done in the past, whether it be not forgiving yourselves, how important is it to identify your strengths and your weaknesses in whatever task is you're embarking upon, so that you can accentuate those strengths and find ways to improve the weaknesses?
Interesting. I mean, when you bring up that topic, Glenn, it always reminds me of one of the things that I tell many of my clients when they are actually asked that question, or ask that question when they go on an interview or when they're speaking about a new job opportunity. What is your greatest strength? Even more importantly, when that question we all want to avoid, what's your greatest weakness? And I often counsel people to say, take a look at your greatest strength, the one that you know you have in your back pocket, and now increase that strength so much that it becomes the only thing you rely on. How would that then become a weakness? And I think that understanding the balance between both a strength being a weakness and a weakness being a strength it's an important perspective to have.
I would have to agree. And I would say, I would see you there and raise you this. Great question, Glenn. Paul, if you don't mind, I'm going to piggyback right on your coattails there and share this piece. So one of the principles I teach in the self-love book that I've written is the assessment assignment process. And I talk about how incredibly critical it is that you do a personal assessment of your being daily. Where do you stand mentally, physically, and emotionally, psychologically, spirit? What's happening inside of you? Like, did you wake up? Something as simple as, did you wake up today? Did you have enough? Did you get enough sleep? Are there any aches and pains that you need to pay attention to? Because oftentimes we are so committed to family, to our careers, that we blow past warning signs, red flags, check engine lights. We do better with the care for our cars than we do our own bodies and our beings. So I share with people in this book, do an assessment, find out where you are, what's happening. And if you realize there are things that need to be addressed, reach out and grab some, you know, knowledgeable professionals capable of addressing the issue, assign them to the issue and let them resolve it if you can't. Self-love is understanding where you are. So it's doing an assessment, but it's also asking for help. There's no shame in that. I think one of the weaknesses is knowing that there's an issue and not asking for intervention and help. So the assessment assignment process is do the assessment, reach out and get knowledgeable professionals involved and assign them to the problem. Hey, Glenn, can you take a look at this? Just like you would a mechanic to a car, a plumber to a leaky, whatever the case may be. Do that in your own life. That's a strength. Not doing that is certainly a weakness. You need to know where you are. You need to have a good baseline and then get others involved, as many people as you possibly can in the process. It'll always be to your benefit. And then here's what happened. You do that every day. You create this mindset of, hey, I'm managing me, my best resource. You are the one person you're going to know all of your life. How about you build the best relationship with that person that you possibly can? Assess and assign every day.
It's really interesting that we have certain schedules that we follow to fix and repair and maintain our cars,
Hmm.
but we don't often talk about that like you just did. Where is the maintenance schedule for our well-being?
Absolutely. And Paul, I'm here to tell you, after years, I'm talking, it's so shameful to tell this part of the story, but I went 20 plus years, didn't eat right, didn't exercise, didn't take my medication, didn't check my blood pressure. I had high blood pressure for years. I am the poster child for self-neglect. I totally worked on pride. Oh, I'm too young to have anything happen to me. And the thing that happened, I wasn't watching the clock. So I get into my late 40s, boom, stroke hits, blood vessel burst in my right side of my brain, spread blood on all of my brain. Everywhere the blood touched, brain cells died. I lost all the feeling and movement. Why? Because I neglected me. I was too busy building a career and doing everything else. The warning signs were there. The flags were waving. Hey, James. And I just kept blowing by them like somebody going through a crowded theater. I see you guys. Hey, how you guys doing? Right? And I'm on the way to the main event, realizing that the crowd's wave and the cheers and the flags were, in fact, the main event. And that's where we break down. So I'm trying to encourage people, whether you've gotten to the degree that I did, where you totally decimate yourself and damn near kill yourself, or you've just had a minor hiccup. It didn't have to happen. Pay attention to the warning signs, get involved, get other people involved, and you can be the best version of yourself in the process, because you'll have that feeling of, I'm managing me. And that's the feeling you want in an interview. When you sit across from a potential employer, what you're trying to communicate is that the person you see is not just my high watermark today, but baby, this is the way I live. This is how I roll. And you want to communicate that so they go, we like this guy, right? You do the same thing when you go on your first date. Think of how you met your wives, if you guys are involved, or your significant others. You wanted to impress. What did you want to impress them with? The fact that you were a good manager of you, so that you would
Right.
pique their end. That's what you want to do. So here's the question. Should you only be your best you when the occasion calls for it, or should you be your best you because you require that? So that's where you get into what self-love is. See, I'm dressed today. I love you guys, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity, but I'm not dressed for you. I'm dressed for me, right? So that
Thanks.
apart and beyond what we do, I do this for James. Make sense? I know it
Absolutely.
sounds borderline arrogant, but I don't mean it to be that way. I want to be my best version. So when I go past the mirror, I go, who is that guy? And my outward appearance matches how I believe I feel about myself on the inside. And there is what I teach my coaching clients, a congruency. My outer being and perception matches who I believe myself to be on the inside. There was a period in time where that didn't happen. So we fight to make sure that harmony, that congruency exists and is in play as often as we possibly can have it.
All right. So let me ask you another quick question, James, and that is, would you consider being a guest again on our show at a later
Absolutely.
date?
I would absolutely love it, and it would be an honor, guys.
We have so much more to talk about, but we don't have the time. At least I don't have the time. I don't believe Glenn does now either. Please tell everyone, again, reiterate the title of your book,
Sure.
where they can find it, and where they can find you to
Sure.
get in touch with you.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to do that. So the title of the book is Becoming. Looky here, I just so happen to amazing how that works. It's called Becoming a Self-Love Practitioner. And you can find the book and you can get in contact with me if you'd like to at encouragementiskey.org. That's encouragementiskey.org. How to order the book. It's available now only as an e-copy, paper copy, and paper version to come. But you can find me there with all the details, bio, history, my coaching practice, everything about the book and more. And then you can also, if you are so inclined, reach out to me at 1-855-96-COACH for those who are old enough to know that the letters in the phone number is what they mean. So that's 1-855. See, you laugh, Paul. You just gave yourself away.
I know.
Right. 1-855-962-62 224 is the 800 number to my coaching practice. Your listeners, your viewers are welcome to reach out to me by text or phone. I'll be happy to talk more about coaching, about self-love principles, and certainly anything about the content of my book and more. Hope that helps.
I don't think he gave it away. I think he owned it.
There you go.
High
I like
five.
it. Yes, without a doubt.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thanks for bearing with our difficulties today. We'll see everyone else back here, same time, same channels next week. Take care, everyone.